From a rad Camaro to a classic 60s Charger, I finally got a car for all you Mopar fans in the audience. Here's all the details on my latest custom RC project. Hello everyone and welcome! I'm back again today with another smaller scale RC build, a short and sweet and pretty simple project, much like that Camaro that I showcased a couple weeks ago, although I'm hoping for a little more success while painting. This car was used for this body mount tutorial video where I showcased a few techniques for getting these 1/24th and 1/25th scale plastic model car bodies mounted to these functional RC chassis. Obviously here I used a few sets of magnets to securely hold the body onto the chassis while still allowing it to be easily removable, something I've showcased on many other smaller scale projects here on the channel as well. Of course, if you'd like to learn more about the methods I like to use for getting these bodies mounted, be sure to check out that previous video. But with this 3D printed FFR SC1 chassis put together and this nice looking MPC body now sitting on top, I knew it wouldn't be long before I'd want to go ahead and get everything painted and put together, which is exactly what I'm going to be showcasing today. As I said, I'm happy to finally be able to have a little classic muscle for all of you Mopar fans. I know I've been showcasing a lot of GM vehicles here recently, but it certainly doesn't get much more iconic than a second generation Charger. Although only spanning 3 model years from 1968 to 1970, I would say that the second generation Dodge Charger is easily the most iconic, thanks not only to its phenomenal styling and optional high performance powertrains, but also thanks to some notable movie and television appearances. The Charger will also be very familiar to NASCAR fans, particularly the Charger Daytona and its B-platform sibling, the Plymouth Superbird. Initially, the design of the Charger proved to be less than ideal for NASCAR racing, with aerodynamics lacking compared to the competition. An attempt to resolve this first resulted in the Charger 500, which engineers hoped the flush-mounted rear window and less air-devouring grille would result in a car that could slice through the air better than its competition. Unsatisfactory results, however, would soon lead to the creation of the more radical and more successful Charger Daytona. Not only a memorable design, but also holding the distinction of the first NASCAR to break 200 miles per hour. The Charger name lives on to this day, though with some generations being a bit less memorable than others. That said though, I think some of the more recent models, the 7th generation in particular, have done a great job of not only reviving a more exciting, performance-oriented and muscular image for the Charger name, but it also brought back a number of styling cues originally seen on the 2nd generation cars. While I suppose the currently produced 8th generation Charger, originally released exclusively as an electric vehicle, was a major turnoff for some buyers, with sales so far showing far less than the outgoing 7th generation models, you at least can't argue with the choice to go with the Charger name on a fully electric vehicle. Model builders and RC enthusiasts interested in building their own reduced-scale replicas will have many choices, especially with this iconic 2nd generation era. While the quality and accuracy of these kits does seem to vary, I only personally have experience with the ones produced by MPC, with some of the older toolings not being the greatest. I have heard some good things about the Revell kits, replicating both the 1968 and 1970 model years, which I definitely would be interested in utilizing for a future project. All of you builders in the audience can let us know which kits are your favorite down below in the comments, but here's the kit that I'll be using for today's project. This here is the City Slicker 1969 Dodge Charger from MPC. A basic, curbside snap kit with modern tooling dating back to 2014. Although obviously a very simple kit, there is some nice detail present, and with very little assembly being required, it'll make for a very easy project. I found the fit and finish to be quite good, although despite the intention of being able to snap all of these pieces together, I did use some glue for some of these parts, just to make sure things don't come loose while driving or handling the car. You've got a couple of different wheel choices in this kit, as well as some other optional parts to choose from. Not exactly the most comprehensive decal sheet I've ever seen, but I'm looking forward to putting some of these decals to use in my scale shop. In particular, I think that American flag would be nice on the wall, and maybe some of those smaller decals would look good on some of the toolboxes. We do have some different choices for license plates, which is cool to see. It's always a good idea to hang on to any unused parts or decals, as they can come in handy for future projects. The one-piece body is nicely molded, showing some great detail. Obviously, no openable hood, as there is no engine included in this kit. For an RC body especially, that keeps things nice and simple, and maybe even a bit more durable in the event of a collision. Having everything molded as one solid piece will be ideal. But I want to briefly now turn our attention to the RC chassis below. Once again, a very familiar sight to regular viewers of this channel, so I won't spend too much time on the details here, but once again I'm using one of our FFR SC1 chassis designs as a base for this car. It's rear-wheel drive with a live axle in the rear, just like a real Charger would be. All of the plastic parts can be 3D printed yourself, with the STL files being available on our Patreon. In fact, I recently updated this chassis design, which I specifically sized to fit these MPC 1/25th scale Dodge Charger model kits. No major overhaul or anything like that, but I just went through and made a few minor tweaks and improvements to the files, as I've been doing for many of our designs, and I added some additional parts, including some new wheel designs. Of course, you'll find the link to that below in the description if you're interested in building the same chassis that I have here for your own project. We also have many different chassis variations available over there if you're trying to build one to fit a different model kit than the one that I'm using here. Simply selecting a different size main chassis piece to fit the wheelbase that you need will allow it to fit many different bodies. Now, although I also used an FFR SC1 chassis for that Camaro that I showcased a couple weeks ago, one major difference between that chassis and this one here is the front suspension and steering assembly. On that Camaro, I utilized our FC01 design, while on this chassis here, I used our FF01 design. Both have their own advantages and disadvantages. For more on this, stay tuned for an upcoming tutorial video, but one advantage of this FF01 design that you see here is that it's a bit easier to 3D print and put together. A lot of times I do tend to prefer the more lifelike double control arm design of the FC01, but this here certainly will get the job done. The wheelbase and width of this chassis is perfectly sized to fit this Dodge Charger body, and after completing the process of getting some body mounts in place, I can move on to getting the plastic model kit painted and put together. An important first step to try and achieve the best possible finished appearance is to identify any areas on the body that might need some trimming or sanding. Imperfections such as any flash or mold lines may be left over as a result of the manufacturing process. Overall, this body does look really good and is nicely molded, but there's a few areas that need some work, which I've helped identify by using a Sharpie. Just a little work with some sandpaper, a sanding stick, or even a hobby knife can quickly remove these imperfections or any artifacts that would not be present on the real car, resulting in a more lifelike finished appearance in the end. It only takes a few minutes to complete, but I think it can greatly enhance the final look of the car. I also went around the entire exterior with some 800 grit sandpaper to help with primer and paint adhesion. Some other steps that I think are extremely helpful are making sure that you test fit all of these pieces prior to doing any painting to ensure that no further sanding or modifications are necessary to get everything to fit in place how it's supposed to. I also decided to carefully go over all of the panel lines with either a hobby knife or a pick tool to deepen them and make them stand out more after the paint has been applied. Next, I located all of the parts that will be required for this project, removed them from the parts tree, and then did any necessary test fits. Better to make any adjustments now than after everything has been painted. You'll notice here that on the clear plastic piece and the interior tub, a little bit of trimming was required to leave enough room for the magnets on the underside of the body. Currently, the interior won't fit on top of that RC chassis, and I'd also like to have some space underneath it to fit some of the electronics. Some sacrifices are always going to need to be made when you're doing an RC conversion like this, with some projects requiring more than others, depending on the level of lifelike accuracy you're trying to achieve. In my opinion, a good compromise is to make the included interior shallower, cutting off the bottom and raising up the floor. Just a bit of measuring, lots of test fits, and gradually making more and more refinements to ensure it's not going to interfere with any of the components like the steering servo. To create a new floor, I simply cut a scrap piece of plastic and glued it to the bottom. With the floor now much higher up, I needed to cut off the lower section of each of the seats. Again, certainly a compromise here, and if you're going to have an interior this shallow, going with a darker color such as black is probably going to be the best way to go, as otherwise a lighter colored interior might make the lack of depth more noticeable. I went ahead and got the front valence installed. I just did a little bit of sanding in a few spots to get it as snug of a fit as possible, and I used some glue to make sure it's secure. But that's about it as far as getting this car ready for paint. That's really the beauty of these snap kits and curbside models, as there generally isn't much work needed to get everything ready to be painted. But definitely take some time with it and test fit all of the parts and do any necessary sanding to remove those mold lines, as that will help result in a better looking finished model. But I went ahead and gave everything a thorough wash and started painting some of the parts and applying primer on the body. If you're wondering about all of the shaking here, there wasn't much primer left in the can and I wanted to try and get every last bit out. No worries about perfect uniformity here, as it's all going to get sanded down anyways. You can really see some nice detail that's present on this body. That primer is not only good for paint adhesion, but also identifying any areas that might still need some more work. After one final round of sanding and washing, I could apply the paint. I'm using some automotive touch-up paint from Duplicolor. This is actually the exact same paint that I used previously for that 1977 Pontiac Trans Am. I figured it would be hard to go wrong with a metallic blue paint job, although not long after painting this body and looking through my collection of paint cans, I had a great idea for a paint job that I think would look really cool on one of these cars, if only I'd have thought of it a little bit earlier. Oh well, I guess I just need to build another one of these Chargers. Nothing wrong with that blue paint here though. It looks great straight out of the booth, so I went ahead and started adding some details. Nothing really special here, just a little work with some markers and a bit of careful hand painting, including adding things like the side marker lights and some watered down black acrylic paint to accentuate those panel lines. Very easy to do, just using some simple tools and techniques, but as you can see, a little bit of patience and a steady hand can really start to bring these cars to life. Likewise, I wanted to work a little magic on the interior, or at least what's left of it. On the real cars, some of the interiors had some nice wood grain, but I just decided to keep things simple here with just a few hand-painted details to try and at least make things look a little more interesting. One thing I decided to try here was applying some floor polish to the seats to differentiate them to make them look more like they're a vinyl type material. I think it looks pretty nice and helps to add just a bit of variation here to an otherwise very uniform matte black piece. But moving back over to the body, I went ahead and installed the taillight pieces and the fuel filter door. And now it was time to embark on the scariest part of this project, which was applying some floor polish as a clear coat. As you'll know if you saw that previous build video featuring that 85 Camaro, at first I didn't have the best luck after applying that floor polish, as I had some issues with cracking and spider webbing, which I believed was a result of applying the floor polish too soon after painting. Although a bit nervous, as I was really happy with how the paint and details were looking so far, I decided to give it a second chance. After several coats to help build up some thickness, as I thought it might help reduce the paint damage as a result of any collisions or scrapes while driving, or even just from handling the car to change the battery or perform any repairs, the result looks pretty nice. It definitely gives the body some nice shine, and although it's a bit milky in color when it's first applied, it does eventually dry to a crystal clear finish. Now obviously I just brushed it on, and it does self-level really well, however you can also apply it using an airbrush. Although it did seem to smooth out quite nicely, I did notice some spots where it's a bit thicker. I also noticed some areas where there seems to be some evidence of some runs. But if you're not going for all-out perfection or don't want to have to spray it clear, this floor polish doesn't seem like a bad way to go. As far as how well it holds up over time or tolerates scratches, I have no idea. I guess time will tell with that, but one thing I noticed with this kit is that it doesn't include any side view mirrors. This is probably a result of it being a snap kit, but thanks to the convenience of 3D printing, I just went ahead and designed a very simple mirror piece myself. It's obviously not really that close to the real world design, but just sort of close enough as it's going to be a really small part that isn't even going to show that much detail when you're looking at it on the finished car. I'll post the STL files below this video if you're interested, but nothing really too special here. I did go ahead and make both a left and right side version. I'll just stick to installing the driver's side mirror on my car, though I'm pretty sure a passenger side mirror would have been optional from the factory. Speaking of 3D printing additional parts, I decided to go ahead and add my own exhaust pieces, as the exhaust that's included in this kit is molded in as a part of the chassis piece. There also isn't really that much detail present. These tailpipe pieces here, which once again I'll have the STL files posted for, aren't exactly matching the factory exhaust, which would have had more of a rectangular tip, so these here will have more of an aftermarket appearance, which is fine. If you really want to build a showroom perfect charger, the more detailed and higher part count kits from Revell would probably be a better place to start. But I moved on to applying the license plate water slide decals to both the front and rear, as well as glued those grille pieces into place. Although these bumpers came with chrome plating, since I had to do some sanding around the sections where they were attached to the parts tree, I decided to just go ahead and paint each of them with some chrome Rust-Oleum paint. I think more and more I'm preferring to use paints on some of these chrome parts rather than leaving the chrome plating that was put there from the factory. While maybe the chrome here could be a little bit shinier, honestly I think it has less of a plasticky, toyish sort of look to it than some of the chrome that you see straight out of the kit. I'd be curious to hear everyone else's opinions on chrome plating versus chrome painting and what products you like to use. I know there's a ton of different chrome paint options out there, and honestly I've had a lot of success with just about all of it. There really do seem to be some good chrome options out there for parts such as these. I also got the interior put together. There's not a whole lot here, but like I've said, I think that some interior is better than no interior. Now earlier, while I was waiting for some of that paint and floor polish to dry, I added all of the necessary electronics to the chassis so it will actually be functional. Again, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail as these electronics are nothing new if you've been following along with some of these recent projects I've showcased here on the channel. If you would like to learn more about them though, I recently put together an entire video dedicated solely to the electronics I like to use with these types of smaller scale projects, so definitely check out that video if you're interested. I did need to do a little bit of soldering here to allow the steering servo to plug into that Radiolink R4 FGM receiver I'm using, but very simple stuff, plenty of room underneath this charger body and underneath that now much shallower interior. Although perhaps a bit barbaric, those modifications made earlier definitely makes finding room for these electronics a lot easier. Nice and simple, and as you can see, everything was working just as it should. At this stage, it's finally time for the final assembly. Once again, very simple as this is a snap kit after all. As I said earlier though, I did use some glue in a few spots just to make sure everything is secured with no risk of anything coming apart while driving. You'll also notice I have some gloves on. This was just to be extra sure that when I'm pressing these parts together, I don't leave behind any fingerprints. I was pretty confident at this point that all of the paint was fully dry, but especially sometimes with that chrome paint, it can take a long time to fully dry. I've noticed that sometimes if you press really hard, you can actually leave behind some fingerprints, so the gloves here help to eliminate the possibility of that happening. The car is so close to being complete at this point, so I really don't want to risk messing anything up. Finally, with this Make It RC decal applied to the back window, the charger is now complete. An extremely simple and very enjoyable project, and I'm very happy with the finished result and the lifelike appearance, even with this more basic snap kit being used for the body and the more basic 3D printed FFR SE1 chassis underneath. It just goes to show that a solid paint job, some careful detail painting, and getting that body properly aligned on the chassis can result in a fantastic looking vehicle in the end. The paint definitely came out looking good. Some of my more recent projects here on the channel have been plagued with some issues and unforeseen setbacks when it comes to this process, so I really needed a win here with this project, and I think it absolutely delivers. As I mentioned earlier, there are some imperfections in that clear as a result of some pooling and runs with it just being brushed on. With this being the case, I'm not sure I'd necessarily choose brushing on this floor polish over spraying a more conventional clear coat like you see me do for other projects. I guess I could try spraying the floor polish rather than brushing it on and seeing how that turns out. I'm sure it would look better than brushing it on, however I'm not really sure there would be any advantages to spraying floor polish versus spraying a more conventional clear coat. Not necessarily the most spectacular or detailed project here on the channel, but as fun as those more complex projects can be, having some of these more basic builds can sometimes serve as sort of a breath of fresh air and a good opportunity to test out some new products and techniques. As far as the performance, once again nothing really out of the ordinary here, as it's simply an FFR SE1 chassis with a 4000 RPM N20 motor and 2S LiPo battery, a combination I've used for many projects, so nothing really out of the ordinary when it comes to the driving experience. But it functions perfectly, drives really smooth, and there's no wheel rub or any other issues to speak of. If you'll recall back to that body mounting tutorial video I made and featured this car in previously, I used a rotary tool on the inside of the body around the wheel arches to remove some of the material to allow as much room for those wheels as possible. A minor thing that's easy to overlook during the build process, but it can be an important step for eliminating any sort of wheel rub. One thing you'll notice with this car compared to that Camaro that I built previously is that if you look closely, this car rolls a lot smoother, even with this concrete being a little bit bumpy for a car of this scale. A huge reason for this is that the model kit tires were used with that Camaro, which were quite hard and not perfectly round, so there's a lot of vibration here by comparison. Contrast that with this Charger that has softer silicone tires that are perfectly round. These tires here are the ones that we sell on our website if you're interested in ordering a set. While oftentimes I do like the appearance of the tires included in a model kit, generally you're not going to get the best performance, nor will they be as smooth. Just something worth pointing out, like with basically anything, there's pros and cons to whichever tires you decide to use. But another great car to add to the collection, and I certainly hope you all enjoyed watching this 69 Charger come to life. Once again, if you'd like to build a similar vehicle yourself, be sure to check out the link to our Patreon down below in the description if you'd like to 3D print the same chassis that I'm using here. Also, of course, a huge thanks to all of our channel members and Patreon supporters for helping to make these videos possible. I really appreciate all the support, and there's lots more cool stuff on the way that I'm really looking forward to sharing with all of you, so I hope you'll stay tuned. But that's all I've got for today's video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.